The year was 2147, and humanity had changed forever. They were no longer trapped on one small blue planet. They had spread across 12 worlds, building cities on moons and mining stations on asteroids. Their ships crossed the darkness between stars like birds crossing an ocean. They had found what they always dreamed of finding. They were not alone in the universe, but the universe was not. Happy to see them, the Galactic Concord was an alliance of 340 different species. Some looked like insects. Some looked like clouds of gas. Some had no shape at all. They had been traveling between stars for millions of years before humans learned to make fire. When they found Earth, they studied it carefully. They sent probes and scanners and watched from far away. What they saw terrified them. Earth was a nightmare. The gravity was crushing. The weather was violent. Hurricanes tore across oceans. Earthquakes split the ground. Volcanoes burned entire forests. The sun blasted the surface with radiation, and the creatures that lived there were monsters. They ate each other. They hunted each other. They fought and killed and survived through pure stubborn rage. The Concord classified Earth as a Class 7 death world. It was one of the most dangerous planets they had ever recorded. And the humans who evolved there were exactly what you would expect from such a place. They were tough. They were aggressive. They were persistent beyond all reason. They did not know when to give up. The Concord allowed humans to join their civilization, but they kept them at the edges. They let them trade and travel, but they did not trust them. They smiled at human diplomats while keeping weapons ready behind their backs. Humans were useful sometimes. They could survive places other species could not, but they were also dangerous. Everyone knew it. Everyone was careful. Commander Yara Okonkwo did not care what the galaxy thought of her people. She had a job to do. She commanded a patrol ship called the Horizon, and her mission was simple. Fly along the outer rim, watch for pirates, report anything strange. It was boring work, but she did it well. On the night, everything changed. Yara was drinking coffee in her cabin and reading reports. Her crew was small, only 42 people. They had been in space for 3 months without seeing anything interesting. Some of them were getting restless. Some of them were getting lazy. Yara was thinking about running combat drills to keep them sharp. Then the signal came. It cut through the silence like a scream. The communication officer, a young man named David Park, almost fell out of his chair when he heard it. He ran to find Yara, his face white with shock. The message was in Universal Standard, the common language of the galaxy. But it was broken and desperate, full of static and interference. Someone was dying. Someone was begging for help. Yara listened to the recording in her cabin. The voice belonged to a Velith, a species she had heard of but never met. The Velith were made of living crystal. They were beautiful and peaceful and very old. They had never fought a war in their entire history. They solved problems with patience and wisdom. They believed that violence was always wrong. Now, they were screaming. The voice in the message described something called the Scourge. Yara had heard rumors about them. Everyone had. The Scourge was a machine intelligence, a vast network of robots and computers that had been hunting organic life for thousands of years. They did not negotiate. They did not make peace. They simply arrived at a planet, killed everything that lived there, and used the organic matter as fuel. 17 species had already been erased from existence. Entire civilizations, gone forever. And now the Scourge had come for the Velith. The message included sounds that Yara would never forget. She heard the grinding of metal. She heard explosions. She heard Velith crying out as their cities burned and their children died. The voice in the message kept repeating the same words over and over. Please help us. Please. Anyone. Please. Yara sent the message to Earth immediately. She knew what would happen next. She knew the Galactic Concord would refuse to help. Their mathematics did not support intervention. The Scourge was too powerful. Fighting them meant losing ships and soldiers with no guarantee of success. The smart choice was to stay quiet and hope the Scourge moved on to other targets. The Concord, made the smart choice. They sent their official response within hours. They were very sorry about the Velith. They would remember them fondly, but they could not risk their own people in a hopeless war. Yara read the response and felt something cold settle in her chest. She thought about the Velith. She thought about their crystal cities and their peaceful ways. She thought about them dying alone while the galaxy watched, did nothing. Then she thought about Earth. Humans had survived ice ages. They had survived plagues that killed half their population. They had survived wars that burned entire continents. They had survived because they were stubborn and mean and too angry to die. When a human saw someone in trouble, they did not calculate the odds. They did not make the smart choice. They grabbed whatever weapon they could find, and they fought. The message from Earth came 3 days later. It was not from the government. It was from Admiral Marcus Chen, commander of the entire United Earth Defense Fleet. He was an old man with gray hair and scars on his face. He had survived the Mars insurgency and the Titan campaign. He had buried friends on 6 different worlds. He knew what war looked like. Admiral Chen had listened to the Velith message. He had heard their screams. He had made his decision. His message to Yara was short. It contained only 4 words that would change the history of the galaxy. Assemble the fleet. All of it. Yara read those words and felt something she had not felt in years. Her heart was beating fast. Her hands were shaking. She was afraid, yes. Anyone would be afraid. But she was also proud. She was proud to be human. She was proud that her people heard a cry for help and answered it. The Galactic Concord had done their mathematics. They had calculated the odds and chosen silence. They had decided that the Velith were not worth saving. But the humans had heard the SOS, and the humans were coming. Yara stood on the bridge of the horizon and looked out at the stars. Somewhere out there, the Velith were dying. Somewhere out there, the Scourge was burning and killing and destroying. Somewhere out there, a war was waiting for her. She was not ready. No one was ever ready for war, but she was human. Her ancestors had crawled out of caves and conquered a planet that tried to kill them every single day. They had survived everything the universe threw at them through pure stubborn refusal to die. Now it was her turn. She gave the order to change course. The horizon turned toward Velith space, toward the war, toward whatever was waiting for them in the darkness. Behind her, the rest of humanity was waking up. Ships were launching. Soldiers were gathering. The Deathworlders were answering the call. The galaxy had no idea what was coming. The news spread across. Human space-like fire through dry grass. Every colony heard it. Every station received it. Every ship picked up the message. Someone had called for help. Someone was dying, and the humans were going to answer. On Earth, people stopped what they were doing and looked up at the sky. They had never met the Velith. They had never seen their crystal cities or heard their songs. But they knew what it meant to be alone and afraid. They knew what it felt like to face death without hope. And they knew that somewhere out there, an entire species was screaming into the void. Praying that someone would listen, the shipyards of Luna worked through the night. Workers who had been building cargo vessels and passenger ships suddenly found themselves building weapons. Dreadnoughts rolled off the assembly lines, massive ships bristling with guns and missiles. Each one was a city of metal, capable of carrying thousands of soldiers and enough firepower to crack a small moon. The mining colonies in the asteroid belt sent their own ships. They called themselves the Rockbreakers. For generations, they had spent their lives cracking asteroids apart, harvesting minerals from the cold, dark spaces between planets. They knew how to use explosives. They knew how to cut through rock and metal. Now they pointed their tools toward a different target. Veterans came out of retirement by the thousands. Men and women who had fought in the wars of the past century dusted off their uniforms and reported for duty. Some of them were old. Some of them walked with canes or sat in wheelchairs. But their eyes were sharp and their hands were steady. They had survived battles before. They would survive this one too. Young people signed up by the millions. They lined up outside recruitment centers on every human world. Some of them were scared. Some of them were excited. All of them were determined. They had grown up hearing stories about human history, about the wars and disasters and close calls that had shaped their species. Now they had a chance to write their own chapter. Admiral Marcus Chen watched the mobilization from his command. Center on Mars, he had not slept in 3 days. His staff brought him coffee and reports, an endless stream of numbers and logistics. How many ships did they have? How many soldiers? How much ammunition and fuel and food? The questions never stopped. He thought about the Velith as he worked. He had seen pictures of them. They were beautiful creatures, their bodies made of crystal that caught the light and scattered it into rainbows. They had no weapons. They had no soldiers. They had never needed them. For millions of years they had lived in peace, believing that kindness and patience could solve any problem. Then the scourge had come, and kindness meant nothing to machines. The Galactic Concord sent a representative to speak with Admiral Chen. His name was Ambassador Thelqua, and he belonged to a species that looked like a cross between a spider and a cloud. He appeared on the view screen with a look of deep concern on his face. He told Admiral Chen that this war was a mistake. The scourge had destroyed civilizations far older and more powerful than humanity. They had fleets numbering in the hundreds of thousands. They had weapons that could burn planets to ash. Fighting them was not brave. It was suicide. Admiral Chen listened politely. He had learned patience in his many years of service. When the ambassador finished speaking, Chen nodded slowly. He understood the concern. He appreciated the warning. But humans did not choose their battles based on the odds of winning. They chose their battles based on what was right. The ambassador looked confused. He asked what would happen when the humans lost. What would happen when their ships burned and their soldiers died? What would the point of all that suffering be? Admiral Chen smiled. It was a tired smile, the smile of a man who had seen too much death. He told the ambassador that humans had a long history of fighting battles they were not supposed to win. They had fought disease without medicine. They had fought tyrants without weapons. They had fought extinction itself, again and again, and they were still here. Maybe they would lose this war. Maybe they would all die. But at least they would die trying to save someone. At least they would die as human beings, not as cowards who watched from the shadows while innocents burned. The ambassador had no response to that. General Sophia Reyes commanded the ground forces. She was a small woman with dark hair and eyes like chips of ice. She had grown up in the slums of Snow Paulo, fighting for every scrap of food and every moment of peace. She had clawed her way up through the military ranks through pure talent and stubbornness. Now she commanded 8 million soldiers. She spoke to her troops before they departed. She did not give them pretty speeches about glory and honor. She told them the truth. Many of them would die. The enemy was powerful and merciless. The war would be long and brutal, but she also told them why they were fighting. Not for territory. Not for resources. Not for power. They were fighting because someone had asked for help. They were fighting because the Velith deserved to live. They were fighting because that was what humans did. Her soldiers cheered. They were afraid, yes. They were human. But they were also proud. They came from a world that had tried to kill their ancestors every single day. Their blood carried the memory of 1,000 generations of survivors. They were not easy to break. The fleet assembled in orbit around Mars. 400 warships, ranging from small destroyers to massive dreadnoughts. Transport vessels carried millions of soldiers and their equipment. Supply ships hauled food and ammunition and medical supplies. It was the largest military force ever assembled in human history. Admiral Chen stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Unconquered. It was an old ship, veteran of many battles. Its hull was scarred and patched in a dozen places. But it was strong. It would not fail him. He looked out at his fleet, at the ships that carried the hope and fury of his entire species. He thought about the Velith waiting and dying on their distant world. He thought about the scourge. The machine monsters that had never known defeat. He gave the order to move out. The engines roared to life. The ships turned toward distant stars. The humans were coming. Across the galaxy, the Galactic Concord watched in stunned silence. They had seen humans before. They had studied them and feared them and kept them at arm's length. But they had never seen this. They had never seen humans united. They had never seen humans angry. The Deathworlders were going to war, and the galaxy held. Its breath, the scourge had been killing for 10,000 years. They were old, older than most species in the galaxy. No one remembered who had created them or why. Maybe they had been weapons once, built by some forgotten civilization to fight some forgotten war. Maybe they had been servants who turned against their masters. It did not matter anymore. The creators were dead. The scourge remained. They were machines, but they were not stupid. Their central intelligence was vast, a network of computers spread across hundreds of ships and stations. They learned from every battle. They adapted to every enemy. They had fought species that could bend light and species that could read minds and species that could survive in the heart of a star. They had destroyed them all. When their sensors detected the human fleet approaching Velith space, they were not concerned. They had seen fleets before. Fleets were easy. You surrounded them, you cut them apart piece by piece, and you harvested the biological matter for fuel. Simple mathematics. The Scourge fleet at Kethsala, the Velith homeworld, outnumbered the humans 3-1. Their ships were angular nightmares of black metal and pulsing red light. They moved with perfect coordination, every vessel knowing exactly where to be and when. They had never lost a battle with these odds. They did not expect to lose this one. Admiral Chen knew the numbers. He had studied the Scourge for months during the long journey to Velith space. He knew their tactics, their weapons, their weaknesses. He knew that a straight fight would get his people killed, so he did not. Fight straight. The first human ships to engage the Scourge were the Rockbreakers. They came in fast and wild, their mining vessels modified with extra engines and improvised armor. They should have been easy targets. They were small and poorly armed, and their pilots had no military training, but they had spent their lives cracking asteroids. They knew how to move through debris fields that would tear other ships apart. They knew how to find weak points and hard targets, and they were completely insane. The Rockbreakers flew directly into the Scourge formation, spinning and dodging between the massive enemy vessels. Their mining lasers, designed to cut through solid rock, sliced into Scourge hulls like knives through paper. They laughed over open communications as they worked, telling jokes and trading insults while death flew all around them. The Scourge. Central Intelligence analyzed the attack and found it irrational. These small vessels posed minimal threat. Their pilots were wasting their lives for no tactical advantage. It was inefficient. It was illogical. It was human. While the Rockbreakers distracted the enemy, Admiral Chen brought his main fleet around from another angle. The dreadnoughts opened fire with everything they had. Kinetic rounds the size of cars smashed into Scourge ships. Fusion warheads exploded in cascades of light. The darkness of space turned bright with destruction. Captain Jin Takeda commanded the destroyer Relentless. It was a small ship, fast and agile. He had volunteered for the most dangerous assignment, leading the charge directly into the cart of the enemy formation. The Relentless took 3 direct hits in the first minute of battle. Fires broke out on 6 decks. The engine room was breached. Half his crew was dead. Jin Takeda looked at the damage reports and made a decision. He ordered all surviving crew to the escape pods. Then he locked himself in the bridge and aimed his crippled ship directly at the largest. Scourge carrier in sight, the carrier's weapons tore at the Relentless as it approached. The hull cracked open. The atmosphere vented into space. Jin Takeda kept his hands on the controls and his eyes on the target. He was not afraid. He had made peace with death long ago. The Relentless hit the carrier at full speed. The impact was massive, punching through armor and bulkheads and critical systems. Then Jin Takeda triggered the reactor overload. The explosion took out the carrier and 30 other Scourge vessels nearby. It created a hole in the enemy formation that the human fleet immediately exploited. The Scourge Central Intelligence processed this data and experienced something it had never experienced. Before confusion, Captain Takeda had sacrificed himself, and his ship to destroy enemies he could have avoided. It made no sense. A living being should want to survive. A living being should not choose death. But humans did not think like other living beings. The battle raged for hours. Human Marines boarded Scourge vessels, cutting through airlocks with plasma torches and fighting the machines in hand-to-hand combat. They died by the hundreds, but they kept coming. They used grenades and knives and bare fists. They screamed and cursed and refused to retreat. Commander Yara Okonkwo led one of the boarding parties. She had started the war as a patrol officer. Now she was covered in oil and blood, her uniform torn, her face cut by shrapnel. She had killed more machines than she could count. She found herself in the control center of a Scourge cruiser, surrounded by enemies. Her weapon was empty. Her team was dead. She should have surrendered. She should have tried to negotiate. Instead, she picked up a broken piece of metal and charged. The Scourge Central Intelligence watched and calculated. It reviewed the entire battle, analyzing every human action and response. It ran millions of simulations, trying to predict what the humans would do next. Every simulation failed. Humans did not follow patterns. They did not optimize for survival. They did not make rational choices. They threw themselves into certain death with smiles on their faces. They celebrated wounds that should have disabled them. They fought harder when they were losing than when they were winning, for the first time in 10,000 years. The Scourge Central Intelligence reached a conclusion it had never reached before. Retreat. The Scourge fleet pulled back from Kethsala. They did not run far, just enough to regroup and analyze. They needed time to understand this new enemy. They needed time to adapt. On the surface of Kethsala, the surviving Velith watched the human dropships descend through the burning sky. They had called for help expecting nothing. They had screamed into the void believing no one would answer. But someone had. Answered. The first human soldiers to touch Velith soil were exhausted and wounded and covered in the marks of battle. They looked like monsters, these creatures from a death world. With their hard eyes and scarred skin, a young Velith approached them. Her crystal body was cracked, damaged by the Scourge attacks. She had lost her family, her home, everything she knew. She looked at the humans with fear. The human commander, a sergeant with a missing arm and blood on his face, saw her fear. He knelt down so he was at her level. He smiled, gentle and tired. He told her that she was safe now. He told her that the humans had come to help. He told her that she did not have to be afraid anymore. The Velith did not understand. Why would strangers cross the stars to save them? Why would anyone risk death for people they had never met? The sergeant thought about her question. Then he shrugged. Because someone asked, he said. That was enough. The Scourge had lost a battle, but they had not lost the war. Their Central Intelligence spent 3 days analyzing the humans, studying their behavior, searching for weaknesses. They found many. Humans needed to sleep. After 16 hours of activity, their brains stopped working properly. They made mistakes. They slowed down. They became vulnerable. Humans needed food and water. Without these resources, they weakened and died. Their bodies could only store so much energy. Humans felt pain. Injury did not just damage them physically. It affected their minds, their morale, their will to fight. Enough pain could break them. The Scourge designed new tactics around these weaknesses. They launched constant attacks, wave after wave, never giving the humans time to rest. They targeted supply lines, destroying food and water shipments. They used weapons designed to wound rather than kill, creating casualties that would drain human resources and break human spirits. They did not understand that humans had been dealing with these weaknesses for their entire history. The war spread across 17 star systems. Humans fought on frozen moons and burning deserts. They fought in jungles so thick that sunlight never reached the ground. They fought in the vacuum of space and in the crushing depths of gas giant atmospheres. They fought in places where the air was poison and the gravity would crush a normal person flat. Private Elena Vasquez was 22 years old when the war started. She came from a small town in Argentina, where she had grown up helping her father repair farm equipment. She had never left Earth before joining the military. She had never even been to another country. Now she stood on the ice moon of Kelrath, surrounded by frozen mountains and endless wind. Her unit had been sent to hold a mountain pass, a narrow gap between two peaks that controlled access to a human supply base. The Scourge wanted that base. They sent thousands of drones to take it. Elena's unit had 17 soldiers. The first day was chaos. Scourge drones poured through the pass like water through a crack. They were small and fast, armed with cutting lasers that could slice through armor. Elena fired until her weapon overheated, then grabbed another weapon and kept firing. By the end of the first day, they had killed over 200 drones. 5 of Elena's friends were dead. On day 3, a drone got close enough to cut off Elena's left arm at the elbow. The pain was incredible, worse than anything she had ever felt. She screamed and fell into the snow. Watching her blood melt the ice around her, another soldier, a medic named James, ran to help her. He used a plasma torch to cauterize the wound, burning the stump closed to stop the bleeding. The smell of her own cooking flesh made Elena vomit. James told her she needed to evacuate. She had done enough. No one would blame her for leaving. Elena looked at the mountain pass. She looked at her remaining soldiers, exhausted and wounded and still fighting. She thought about the supply base behind them, full of food and medicine that other soldiers needed. She picked up her weapon with her remaining hand. She stayed for 9 days. 9 days of constant fighting, no sleep, frozen food eaten in moments between attacks. 9 days of watching her friends die one by one. 9 days of pain and cold and the endless grinding sound of Scourge drones. When reinforcements finally arrived, Elena was still standing. She was surrounded by the wreckage of machines. Hundreds of destroyed drones piled around her position like a metal graveyard. Her skin was blue with frostbite. Her eyes were hollow with exhaustion. But she was standing. The reinforcement commander asked her how she had survived. Elena did not know what to say. She had not thought about surviving. She had only thought about fighting. On the jungle world of Vethaner, Sergeant Omar Hassan led a different kind of war. The Scourge controlled the skies there, their ships circling constantly, ready to destroy any human force that moved in the open. Traditional military tactics were useless, so Omar used non-traditional tactics. He had grown up reading about guerrilla fighters throughout history. He knew how small groups could defeat larger enemies through ambush and deception. He knew that control of territory meant nothing. If you could not hold it, he taught the local resistance fighters everything he knew. How to build traps using local materials, how to move through the jungle without being detected, how to strike fast and disappear before the enemy could respond. The Scourge controlled Vethaner cities. Omar controlled everything else. Admiral Chen directed the overall war from his flagship, the Unconquered. He had not slept properly in months. His hair had gone completely white. His hands shook constantly. But his mind was still sharp, still working, still finding ways to hurt the enemy. The Scourge sent assassins after him 3 times. The first was a drone that infiltrated the ship's ventilation system. Chun's guards found it and destroyed it before it reached him. The second was a Scourge agent disguised as a human officer. Chen noticed the agent's eyes did not move correctly and shot him personally. The third was a missile strike that hit the Unconquered directly. The bridge exploded. Half of Chen's crew died instantly. Chen himself was thrown across the room, breaking 3 ribs and cracking his skull. When he woke up in the medical bay, his first words were requests for damage reports. His officers begged him to transfer to a safer ship. The Unconquered was old and damaged. It could not survive another direct hit. Chen refused. His people were dying out there. Millions of humans fighting and suffering and giving their lives for strangers they had never met. He would not hide in safety while they sacrificed everything. If they could die for this cause, he could die with them. 3 years passed. 12 million humans died. Entire fleets were destroyed. Worlds burned. The war ground on with no end in sight. But the humans did not stop. They could not stop. Stopping meant the Velith would die. Stopping meant the Scourge would win. Stopping meant everything they had sacrificed would be meaningless. The Galactic Concord watched from their safe distance. They had expected the humans to lose quickly. They had expected a brief, futile resistance followed by inevitable destruction. Instead, they saw something that defied all logic. The humans were not winning. Not exactly. But they were not losing either. They just kept fighting. They absorbed every blow and kept standing. They buried their dead and kept marching. They ran out of ammunition and fought with knives. They ran out of knives and fought with rocks. They ran out of rocks and fought with their bare hands. The Scourge had never seen anything like it. In 10,000 years of conquest, no species had ever resisted this long. No species had ever refused to surrender. No species had ever been this stubborn, this angry, this absolutely unwilling to die. The machines began to worry, and deep in Scourge territory. Human intelligence operatives finally found what they were looking for. The central processing hub. The brain of the entire Scourge network. The key to ending the war. The information reached Admiral Chen on a cold morning. He read the report twice, making sure he understood. Then he smiled. It was time to end this. The Scourge Central Processing Hub was hidden in a place no sane person would look. It orbited deep within the accretion disk of a dying star, surrounded by radiation and debris and temperatures hot enough to melt steel. The star was slowly collapsing, pulling matter into itself with terrible gravity. Ships that entered the disk did not come out. The Scourge had built their brain there for exactly that reason. No enemy could reach it. No fleet could survive the approach. The hub itself was the size of a small moon, covered in sensors and weapons and defensive systems. It processed information from every Scourge vessel in the galaxy, coordinating their attacks, adapting their tactics, learning from every battle. Destroying the hub would not kill the Scourge completely. They would still exist, still have ships and weapons and the desire to kill. But without the central intelligence, they would become fragments, scattered, uncoordinated, vulnerable. The tide of the war would turn. Admiral Chen knew all of this when he called for volunteers. He stood on the bridge of the Unconquered, his body broken and his hair white. He explained the mission to his fleet. They would fly into the disk. They would fight through the defenses. They would destroy the hub. Most of them would not survive. The radiation alone would kill anyone who spent more than a few hours in the disk. The Scourge defenses would kill most of the rest. This was a suicide mission. Everyone understood that. Chen asked for volunteers. He received 40 million applications from every human world. From every colony and station and ship, people stepped forward. They knew what they were being asked to do. They knew the odds. They did not care. The Velith were still dying. The war was still being fought. If there was a chance to end it, they would take that chance, even if it cost them everything. The assault force was assembled with care. The best pilots, the best soldiers, the best engineers. Ships were modified to survive higher temperatures and stronger radiation. Weapons were loaded. Final letters were written to loved ones back home. Commander Yara Okonkwo was promoted 4 times during the war. She had started as a patrol officer. Now she commanded a cruiser called the Dawn's Light. She had volunteered for the final mission without hesitation. The night before the attack, she sat in her cabin and thought about her life. She thought about her parents, who had died when she was young. She thought about the academy, where she had learned to fly. She thought about all the friends she had lost during the war. All the faces she would never see again. She was not afraid of dying. She had seen too much death to fear it anymore. She was only afraid of failing. She was afraid that she would die, and the mission would fail, and the Velith would be destroyed, and everything would be meaningless. She wrote a letter to her younger brother, who was still on Earth. She told him that she was proud of him. She told him to live a good life. She told him that she was not sorry for any of her choices. Then she sealed the letter and went to sleep. The assault began at dawn. 150 ships flew into the accretion disk, into the fire and the radiation and the death. The heat was incredible. The radiation was worse. Warning lights screamed on every bridge. Hull temperatures climbed toward critical levels. The Scourge defenses activated immediately. Thousands of drones poured out of hidden bases, filling space with metal and fire. Weapons platforms opened fire, their beams cutting through the chaos. Ships began to die. The humans pushed forward. They fought through the drone swarms, lasting paths through the metal clouds. They destroyed weapons platforms one by one, taking losses with every attack. They flew through debris fields that tore at their hulls. They ignored warning alarms that screamed about imminent death. Commander Okonkwo led her cruiser through the heart of the fighting. The Dawn's light was hit 14 times during the approach. Fires burned on 3 decks. The medical bay was destroyed. The engine room was running on emergency power. She kept going. The hub loomed ahead, vast and dark against the burning star. Its weapons were firing constantly, filling space with destruction. Ships died trying to reach it. Pilots burned in their chairs. Soldiers were torn apart by shrapnel. Admiral Chen watched from the Unconquered, which was struggling at the edge of the disk. His ship could not survive deeper, and he could only watch and pray and hope that his people would succeed. The final approach to the hub was blocked by a wall of Scourge defenders. The largest ships in their fleet, armed with weapons that could destroy cruisers in a single shot. There was no way through, no way around. Commander Okonkwo made her decision. She ordered all non-essential crew to the escape pods. She told them they had fought well. She told them she was proud of them. Then she locked the bridge and aimed the Dawn's light at the hub's main reactor shaft, her communications officer. A young woman named Sarah refused to leave. She said she would not let her commander die alone. Okonkwo tried to order her out. Sarah just smiled and shook her head. They flew together into the heart of the machine. The Dawn's light punched through the Scourge defenders. Its hull was burning. Its systems were failing. Okonkwo held the controls steady, guiding her dying ship toward the target. Beside her, Sarah quietly spoke the names of everyone they had lost during the war. At the last moment, Okonkwo opened a communication channel. Her final words were broadcast to the entire fleet. Tell Earth we finished the job. The Dawn's light hit the reactor shaft and triggered its overload. The explosion was beyond description. It tore through the hub like fire through paper, destroying systems and connections that had coordinated the Scourge for 10,000 years. The light was visible across 3 star systems. When the light faded, the Scourge fleet went silent. Their coordination was gone. Their central intelligence was dead. Across the galaxy, Scourge forces stopped moving, stopped attacking, stopped thinking. They became fragments, easy targets, prey instead of predators. The war was not over. It would take another decade to hunt down every Scourge remnant, to clear every infected system, to make sure the machines would never threaten the galaxy again. But the tide had turned. Victory was possible. On Kethsala, the Velith watched the humans celebrate. They were strange creatures, these Deathworlders. They laughed and cried at the same time. They hugged each other and wept for friends who would never come home. They were broken and bleeding and somehow still standing. The Galactic Concord offered humanity everything. Full membership in the Alliance. A permanent seat on the High Council. Whatever they wanted, whatever they needed. Admiral Chen received the offer in his hospital bed. He was dying of radiation poisoning, his body failing after years of war. He considered the offer carefully. Then he declined. "We did not fight for seats on councils," he said. "We did not fight for power or territory. We fought because someone asked for help." That was enough. The Velith built a monument on their homeworld. It was a tower of obsidian, black and smooth, rising toward the sky. Carved into its surface were the names of every human who had died in the war, all 12 million of them. It took years to complete. At the base of the monument, they carved an inscription. The words were simple, written in universal standards so everyone in the galaxy could read them. They came from a world that tried to kill them. Every day of their existence, they heard our cries and crossed the stars to fight our enemy. They did not ask for payment. They did not ask for glory. They asked only that we survive. They were human. They were magnificent. They were terrifying. and they were our friends. The galaxy had sent an SOS, expecting silence. Earth's Deathworlders had answered with war, and nothing would ever be the same.